I think that when you've lived in a community for a long time, or when you've worked in a certain field for a long time, you think like, "Oh, that's just the way it is. Like, that's how
Mhm.
we've always done things. That's how things have always gone." And sometimes it does take an outsider to come in and say like, "Okay, like maybe that's how you've always done things, but maybe you shouldn't."
Alrighty, welcome back. It's Alabama Politics This Week with Josh Moon, David Person. And we are happy now to have with us USA Today is Gina Barton. How are you, Gina?
I'm doing okay. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Gina, and let me make sure I get your title correct, or I'll just let you get it correct. What is your title at USA Today?
I'm an investigative reporter at USA Today, and I focus on criminal justice issues and police misconduct.
Oh, so you're going to be moving to Alabama then? That should be fun. Should be fun for you. Uh,
I've definitely been told there are lots of stories in Alabama that I ought to be looking into.
There are lots. As a matter of fact, I mean, you just in the general area where you were, there was the shooting. We had the shooting in Decatur, we had the shooting in Huntsville, we had the shooting in Montgomery, we had Hansville absolving its police department. We've got the half of the Walker County Sheriff's Department in jail. So yeah, we had the whole deal with what was the little small town that were writing all the tickets that Archibald and the gang won a Pulitzer for. Um, it's police corruption's kind of what we do here. You did a fantastic piece though. It was you and a partner, correct?
Yes, my colleague Will Carlos, who's a national reporter for
Okay.
USA Today, worked on this story with me, and he was the one who actually traveled there to Alabama and did the interview with Nick Smith in person.
Oh, okay, okay, all right. Well, yeah, it was really a fantastic piece, and we'll try to link it up on when we post this episode of the podcast and
Thank
send
you.
people over there to it. And anyone who is out there you're listening now and want to Google it up, just Google up Walker County USA Today Sheriff's stuff. You know what to put in the Google machine, and find it because it really was a very thorough. You know, so I've done reporting for a long time. David has done some reporting as well and written columns and stuff for a long time. And you know, it's always interesting, I think, to kind of get kind of an outsider's perspective. I think there can be pluses and minuses to that. I mean, I think sometimes somebody coming in from the outside can miss a little bit of the nuance, but at the same time, they take this sort of 10,000-foot view a lot of times that provides perspective. I think for people that may be kind of accustomed to the sort of things that go on. And I think y'all did this with your story. It was, first of all, it was very detailed. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not knocking any details at all here. But it also, I think, provided a perspective where you're just like, yeah, that shouldn't be happening. And it's just that these sorts of things should not happen. I guess when you first started, kind of diving into this, what did you think going in? And what were your thoughts as you were kind of going through this?
I think you make an excellent point. I think that when you've lived in a community for a long time, or when you've worked in a certain field for a long time, you think like, "Oh, that's just the way it is. Like that's how
Mhm.
we've always done things. That's how things have always gone." And sometimes it does take an outsider to come in and say like, "Okay, like maybe that's how you've always done things, but maybe you shouldn't."
Right,
um
right.
And so Will Carlos, my reporting partner, and I have both been covering police misconduct and police brutality for more than 20 years each. And both of us, when we saw this video of Tony Mitchell in the Walker County Jail, and when we started to hear more of the details of what happened to him, we both agreed that this was one of the worst cases we've seen during all that time, in our reporting all over the country. It was just the fact that it went on for 2 weeks and
Uh-huh.
that it was so obvious just looking at him
Right.
that there was something terribly wrong going on here and that nobody tried to help him, and in
Yeah.
fact, people were actively, abusing him at the time.
Yeah, I think, you're right. It was a very egregious case of police brutality. And we've seen some others that, I think people could quibble over whether this one's worse or that one, whatever. But certainly this stacks up against any of them. To me, the most surprising thing to me about this one was the fact that so many people were involved, and not simply police officers, but medical personnel as well, that who were there, who participated in the abuse, who certainly participated in the neglect of Tony Mitchell and watched him suffer. But that's my opinion on it. It's my, that was surprising to me. You've done this a lot of places. Did that catch you by surprise?
That struck us too. In all my years of covering this topic, usually there are a few or a minority of people in a department or in a jail who are doing the wrong thing, but there are always a couple who are doing the right thing.
Mhm.
And in this case, Nick Smith told us that there were 41 sheriff's department employees working in the jail at the time that Tony Mitchell was there, and 20 of them were indicted on federal charges of violating his civil rights. So that's like almost half of the people who were employed there at the
Yeah.
time. So
Right.
that was a lot. And then there was one whistleblower, Karen Kelly, who eventually
Mhm.
did leak the video, and that's how the whole story got out, but she did that afterwards. And so nobody at the time saw what was happening, and they brought it to their supervisor's attention, some of them, but nobody brought it to the attention of anyone who could do anything, and nobody just took that initiative and did it. And I understand that, from reading the plea agreements, they were scared and there was a culture of, you know, that this is just how things go.
Yeah.
But the fact that it went on for so long and there were so many people involved and that it didn't come out until after Tony Mitchell had died, all three of those things really struck Will and I as newsworthy and worth reporting for a national audience.
Gina, first of all, I want to echo what Josh said about just the level of reporting that you and your colleague did. Extraordinary, just extraordinary detail. As somebody who has done a lot of reporting and column writing, I was just enormously impressed just with that. I want to
Thank you.
know, first of all, how did this even get on your radar? How did you guys learn about this?
We got a tip from somebody in the community there in Walker County. And in fact, my colleague Will got that tip about a year ago, around the time that the federal indictments started coming down and the protests were happening. And we both had lots of other things on our plates. And so we didn't really start digging into it until about 6 months ago. And that was when we started really looking into it and saying, hey, there's a sheriff's primary in May, and we would really like to get this story out before then so that we can inform voters of what's going on with the incumbent sheriff. And so the way that we were able to get to the level of detail that you two gentlemen are talking about is it took 6 months, and we went through hundreds, maybe thousands of pages of court documents, not just in the criminal case, but in civil suits, not only in Tony Mitchell's case, but in others. And we're able to do lots of interviews. As I said, Will actually made a trip there with a videographer and photographer. We got the videos. We have so much more information than we were even able to put into the story because, we're not writing a book here, so at some point you have to stop. But there was just so much information just waiting to be found once we had the time to start looking for it.
Yeah. You said you're not writing a book, but the level of reporting that you guys did and the details that you uncovered are so rich and I think so informative. I would say you probably should think about writing a book. This one,
Well, thank you.
yeah,
And I mean, I wanna give credit both to Will Carlos, who co-wrote the story with me, and to our editor, Romy Ruiz, who had really encouraged us to write this as a narrative, to
Mhm.
really write it in such a way as people felt like they were right there in the jail, both with Nick Smith and with Tony Mitchell, that we really wanted people to be able to feel for themselves and kind of see for themselves, visualize for themselves what was happening. Because unfortunately, these sorts of things happen kind of often. And
Mhm.
so if you are not able to write it and present it in a compelling way, it's easy for people to just blow it off and say, like, oh, another guy died in jail, whatever, no big deal. And
Mm.
to us, it is a big deal.
Yeah, yeah. So, I wonder if now I remember in your story that, one of the jailers, uh, and I don't remember what category this man fell in, but one of the male jailers said something about, well, that's what he gets for shooting at a cop, something along that line. And this was his response, I think, to the fact that that Mr. Mitchell, had received this horrible treatment. Um, does that seem to be, from your reporting, does that seem to be what motivated this? And I want to also kind of add this to the context of my question. Many times, as a black man, what I've observed is many times this level of brutality is motivated by racism, and it often happens in racial contexts. But this was not a racial context. This was a young white man who was brutalized by the police, by law enforcement. Do you think it's because they believe that he, whether that's accurate or not, that he shot at them?
And I mean, sadly, a lot of people that we told about this story were surprised that this happened to a white man in Alabama rather than a black man. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody expected that racial context and
Mhm.
racism and discrimination to be there. Um, I think that definitely there were, we only quoted one of them in the story, but there were actually two plea agreements where jailers said, every day somebody would say something along the lines of, he gets what he gets since he shot at cops. And since the story ran, I've actually had emails from two people. I don't know if they're from Walker County or where they're from, who have said something along the lines of, well, if you don't want to be treated like that, don't commit a crime, right? Um, but I think that those people are missing the very important nuance that Tony was not committing a crime when his cousin Steve called 911. He was seriously having a mental health crisis, and his cousin called them because he needed help, not because he needed law enforcement to protect him or anything else. So as far as whether he actually had a gun and fired at the officers or not, there was a criminal complaint filed by the district attorney, Bill Adair's office, charging Tony Mitchell with attempted murder. And there was a deputy who swore in that complaint that Tony Mitchell fired at least one shot toward the officers before he ran into the woods to try to get away from him on that day in January 2023 when they arrested him. So, Nick Smith, when we asked him, said he kind of dodged the question. He said, I got a call for a report of shots fired. So I'm assuming shots were fired. So that was about all we were able to get out of him. Generally, I trust a criminal complaint because you've got a lawyer and a police officer swearing that this happened. Although
Mhm.
I'm sure you all know as well as I do that some people do swear to things that aren't true.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
but in any case, the jailers believed that Tony Mitchell had shot toward the cops, and in fact, at least one of them believed that he was trying to kill them. Um, and so I think
Hmm.
that's I can't speak to their motivation, but from reading the plea agreements, I think that definitely was something that stood out as something that, a few of them said was their motivation.
But was a weapon
Another
ever recovered?
not that I'm aware of. We weren't able to get a straight answer to that from anyone. Um, the DA's office never called me back. I must have called and emailed over there like at least half a dozen times.
Wow.
And as I said, Smith dodged the question. So I don't know the answer to that question. I read a police report that said he fired at them, but it didn't say anything about what kind of gun, where the gun was. I don't know if there are other reports. But I always come back on, even if he did fire at them, even if he would have fired at them and hit one of them and killed one of them, it is illegal to treat somebody in jail the way that he was treated.
Absolutely.
There is a
Yeah.
constitution, and so no matter what crimes somebody commits, where I live in Wisconsin, there is no death penalty, but I believe in Alabama there is, but there's due
Oh, wow.
process that, needs to happen before somebody can be put to death for that. And so I think that's why the federal investigation began, because that whole process was just bypassed. And, these people who were supposed to be protecting him did things that resulted in his death.
Yeah. Yeah. What I'll tell you the one thing that was that I still wonder about. And in the reporting locally and the reporting that y'all have done, I've never really been able to get a clear picture on, and that is how the people who are in charge basically of oversight of that sheriff's department, I'm assuming that's the county commission, and the various other DA's office and other people that work with them, how they feel about what took place there. And did you get any sense of that?
We did not have a lot of luck of having any of those people talk to us.
Yeah,
We have, as I had mentioned, Bill Adair did not return my calls and messages. The state licensing certification body that that voted to decertify Sheriff Smith as a law enforcement officer just confirmed in a very simple statement that yes, they had voted to do that.
yeah,
I'm sure you've seen the same press release that I've seen, where
mhm,
the county commission said, um, it's out of our hands under the law. The sheriff can run the place as he sees fit.
right,
The one person who was outraged by it was a retired professor named Susan Pace Hamill, who has spent her entire career there in Alabama. And
hmm,
she basically said, you know, getting rid of an elected sheriff in a small community there is like deposing a king, that
yeah,
people just think that the sheriff is in charge and he can do no wrong. And if you don't want to suffer abuse or neglect, then don't get yourself arrested, basically.
yeah.
And I think that attitude, it's really harmful for society, and people don't change their minds about that until it happens to them or someone they know or someone they love, and that's really unfortunate.
Yeah, the other thing too is Nick Smith. And I took from reading the story that that Nick Smith was not very sorry for what has occurred. Or maybe he's sorry that it happened to him in some way, but that he has not really taken a lot of responsibility for the action. And matter of fact, as far as I can tell, he hasn't taken any responsibility for any of the actions that took place under his watch, and has continued to brush it aside and blame others for it. But when it come right down to the actual torture and death of Tony Mitchell, did you find him to be in any way remorseful for what took place? Did he express that? Were there any sort of remorse on his behalf for at least what happened to him?
So, if you get a chance to watch the video that we have posted with our story, I think
Mhm.
that is really telling and answers that question. My colleague Will at one point said to Nick Smith, "Okay, can we agree that something really, really bad happened to Tony Mitchell in your jail?"
Mhm.
And Sheriff Smith would not concede that point. He finally said, something that happened that required change. That was as far as he would go. And then later he said he was sorry that Tony's family went through what they went through and that no family should have to go through that. So when we were asking him about responsibility, he said a couple of things. One was he said it was chain of command and
Mm-hmm.
his office is upstairs from the jail. He's not in the jail every day. He doesn't hear every little thing that happens in the
Right.
jail. Now some people have countered and said, well, you're the sheriff and you're in charge of the jail, so maybe you should know what happens in the jail.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe you should go down there every day or every couple days at least. Um, and then the other thing that he talked about was this county hiring process, which again, as an outsider, did seem really crazy to me. Like when he explained it to us about how it's a civil service position
Mm-hmm.
and he doesn't really have a choice when he gets these lists of names of the top scorers on the civil service test. Um, that was so crazy to us. We didn't think it was true, but then we verified it and it is
Right.
true. And so, but I do think there are a couple of things to say about that. This didn't make it into the story, but he at one point told Will that about 30% of the people that had been hired by the sheriff's department, he would not have chosen to hire them. But again, there's that discrepancy that says, well, okay, maybe you wouldn't have hired 30% of the people, but now almost 50% of the people have been charged. Some of the people who have been charged, he has continued to defend and,
Mm-hmm.
wanted to rehire. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then he's allowed to fire people.
Yeah.
And when we asked him about that, he said, well, once somebody passes their probation, it's hard to fire them. But then, as I pointed out earlier, he did fire Karen Kelly, who leaked that video, and that didn't seem hard for him.
Yeah.
Um, so he seems to he believes he told us that he believes he's doing the right thing, that he wanted to make some of these changes before Tony Mitchell's death, but you're just never gonna get the number of jail deaths to zero. He said his predecessor had 9. He's only had 4 so far. That's an improvement. He feels like you're never gonna get to 0 and he's, moving it in the right direction.
Yeah, yeah, he's kind of a jackass. The thing I think that kind of sums this up is, as far as I can tell, the only person that Nick Smith has blamed or held responsible for anything is the lady who leaked the video and told everybody this thing happened.
That's that was basically what our reporting showed, yes. As
Yeah,
far as we could tell, nobody else was disciplined or let go, as a result of this situation until after they were, indicted and or pleaded guilty.
yeah,
And in
that's
fact, there was one man who got a deferred, prosecution agreement, who I think I've been told, I don't know if it's true, that, Nick Smith wanted to hire back, once his case was resolved, but he wasn't able to because he lost his, law enforcement certification. So you'd have
yeah.
to ask him that to verify, but that's what I've heard.
Yeah, and it also seemed, while he complained about the hiring process, it also seemed as though he had power to hire whoever he wanted to as well. So he could have filled the positions even before the civil service test was taken, and certainly could have fired people that he felt didn't live up to the standards of the job. And instead, at least one of those people he named Rookie of the Year. So I just it just is it's a mess, and it has been. But listen, Gina, thank you for the reporting, first of all, and doing the story at all, and then
Yeah.
for spending some time with us and talking about it. We really, really appreciate it all the way around. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for
Yes.
having me on. I really hope that it has an impact, and I hope that, voters will keep in mind some of the things that we reported when they go to the polls in May for the Republican sheriff's primary.
Great
Yeah, we're going
job,
to do our
Gina.
best.
Great job.
We're going to do our
Great
best.
job.
Thank you. We really
Yeah.
appreciate it. Thank you, Gina. It's
Thank
Gina Barton
Mhm.
from USA Today. Look, we're going to have the link up here with the podcast. Y'all go and read the story. Google it up if you don't want to wait on that, and just read through it and be disgusted by the whole sad, sordid tale. All right, we're going to slide out. It's Alabama politics this week. We're back in a minute.